Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Rent Prep for Landlords. So this is episode number 299, and I'm your host, Eric Worrell. And we got a quick episode for you today, but a pretty big topic, or at least a salacious title. And we're going to be talking about a landlord who was fined $150,000 and why they were fined and what they could have done to avoid it. I'm going to get to that right after this.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah.
Welcome to the Rent Prep for Landlords podcast. And now your host, Eric Worrell.
So today's featured story comes from AJC, which is the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. And it's an article by Maya T. Prabhu, which was written on February 14th, 2020. So in this article, it talks about how some North Georgia landlords have apologized to the woman they evicted in 2018 because she invited black guests to the Adairsville home she was renting. So a really quick summary of today's podcast is basically the person who was living at this rental property had a guest over who was black, and the tenant was white, if that matters for the story. And the tenant was having over a male black friend who had a kid, and they were coming over to play with her two kids who were close in age to the male friend. And the landlord actually showed up and let the person know that this was not okay, made some racial slurs at the tenant, and said that she was going to call Child Protective Services for letting her kids play with those kids. I mean, some truly just horrific things that you'd like to believe aren't happening. And I guess this would have been 2018. But, I think we all know that that's kind of an ignorant viewpoint to have, to think that these things don't happen. But one of the interesting things about this story is how many things got involved and what that price tag was to that landlord of $150,000 and what the meaning of that is. So to get a little context from Sutton, who is the tenant, she said in her statement that my landlord's behavior was not just immoral, it was also illegal. I'm glad to see the McCoys are being held accountable and hope this settlement brings us one step closer to creating a more just society where people of all races can live together without fear. So according to her lawsuit, and this is kind of recapping a little bit, but she was renting month to month starting in August 2017. September 2018 is when she had the guest over, and then the landlord, Alan McCoy, appeared at her home and told her she would have to leave. It also says that Sutton being the tenant, recorded a conversation with Patricia McCoy, which was also the landlord, in which she told her landlord she had not done anything to deserve this. And Patricia accused her of saying, maybe you like black dogs, but I don't, so get your stuff and get out. Again, really awful, horrible thing that she's insinuating there. Frankly, it feels great to hear that these people got a $150,000 fine. And I know sometimes there's this adversarial landlord versus tenant relationship, and it gets talked about a lot in this podcast. And of course, we're always looking out for landlords. In this particular podcast, I am looking out for landlords. I think there are some lessons you can pull from this. I don't think it's a lesson, just to be kind to people and not be, a jerk. That's not what it's about. But in this particular case, this landlord got what was coming to them, but the $150,000 fine is pretty crazy, right? But it's not like they just said something awful that was a racial slur. They also, inhibited on these people's rights in a lot of different ways. So the article goes into, or the attorneys for Sutton, again, the tenant, sued the McCoys, arguing their actions violated the Federal Civil Rights Act and the federal and state Fair Housing Acts. So you have three different acts that they're saying they're in violation of. So then when, this news story spreads, the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia and the Cohen-Milstein law firm filed the lawsuit on Sutton's behalf. So I'm not like a attorney, so I don't really know what that means in the fact that there was two different parties filing the lawsuit. But what I gather from that is that her attorneys, Cohen-Milstein law firm, filed, but then a separate entity, the American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia, filed. And it's just it's crazy to me that somebody can be this not only hateful, but just dumb, telling people who can come over and visit to their house and dictating that kind of thing to them. Like, I wouldn't care if it was an alien coming from another planet. As a landlord, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to say, oh, I saw you had some aliens over. Cool. I wouldn't even say that. And I think what you're going to find with this story is if they had fined them $1,500, that it probably wouldn't have really made any news at all. I certainly wouldn't be talking about it on this podcast. But when it's $150,000 to a small-time landlord, that is huge. I mean, anybody can understand that you're not going to make money on that property unless you hold it for 100 years. So they just kind of sank their own investment in that form there just because they are awful people and they really deserved it. But the other thing that's interesting to keep in mind too is sometimes you have disagreements with your tenants, and it's not something where it's so obviously right and wrong like this story. It could be something where it's a little bit, questionable. And, these things come up, whether it be wear and tear or damages of other sorts to the property that happen. But in this case, you can see that the recording that was used was actually used against the landlord. And I'm sure that the tenant did not let them know that they were recording the conversation, which really varies state by state and what the legalities of that are. But, the tenant recorded the conversation, and that was another thing that contributed to this landlord incurring this huge, massive fine. Because really outside of that, it would have been kind of like a he said, she said situation. So just be smart when you're communicating with your tenants. Understand that, heck, some of you I know record conversations if it works in your state's area, but just don't say something that's incriminating. Don't say something that you're going to regret. Understand that there are conversations that are recorded, and then, of course, above all else, follow the national laws here. Don't be a jerk. Don't be somebody who's, giving landlords a bad name. And I know it's a very small percentage of the population, that would read an article like this and think that the landlord got hosed. But just do the right thing and be smart about the way you're running your business. And it is a business, and this person was not running it as a business. So that's the quick takeaway for today's article, and keep it in the news from ajc.com. If you guys want to check that out, it'll be in the show notes. And yeah, it's kind of sad doing these types of podcasts, but I feel like they deserve the attention that they get because these things still happen. And hopefully, if you're in a circle of landlords, you're at an investor meetup and you hear somebody make a joke or you hear somebody crack a joke, you can be the bigger person and not laugh at it, not feed into that kind of culture and, say, hey, that's a problem, that's messed up. And, even if you disagree with me, like the law is not going to either. So sometimes that's what people need is they need that scary fine that somebody else got to wisen up. So whatever it may be, however people can be kinder to each other and create a hospitable living situation for everybody that everybody deserves, I think is a better thing. So I, for one, am in favor of this massive fine. And I say, why not? Person deserved it. All right, guys. We'll try and get on a more positive, though, track next week. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week and look forward to catching up with you next week. Take care.